It is a grey morning in the year 950, and you are 7 years old. You wake on a bench against the timber wall of a longhouse, in the dark and the wood smoke, your bare feet already cold on the packed earth floor. Somewhere a baby is crying. An ox shifts in its stall at the far end of the same long room, and your mother is coaxing the ashes of the central hearth back into flame. Nobody tells you to get up and play, and nobody tells you to get up and go to school, because there is no such thing, not here, not for you, not anywhere in your world. You get up because there is work, and because you are old enough now to do it. And here is the thing that would quietly unsettle almost anyone from a later age looking in on you. In 5 short years, by the time you are 12, your childhood will be, for all practical purposes, finished. There will be no gentle drift through your teens, no long soft in-between where you are neither child nor grown. That whole idea has not been invented yet, so stay with me in this cold Norse morning, because the way these people raised their children, quickly, closely, and always under the shadow of death, tells you more about who the Vikings truly were than any raid ever could. Let me set you down properly first. The year is around 950, and you live in the Norse lands, on a farm of turf and timber, or in one of the crowded wooden trading towns, a place like Hedeby on the southern neck of Denmark, or Birka on its cold Swedish island. Your family is not grand. Your father works the land or a trade. Your mother runs the household with an authority no one questions, and you are one of several children, some older, some younger, and almost certainly some who did not live, because that is the first and hardest truth of a Norse childhood, and there is no honest way around it. Death sat very close to the cradle. In this world, roughly half of the children who survived their birth would not live to see the age of 7. Fever, cold, hunger, and 100 illnesses no one could name took them, quietly and often, to simply reach the age you are now. To be 7 and standing and strong on that cold floor was already an achievement your parents would have counted as a kind of victory, and that shadow shaped everything, right from the very beginning of a Norse life, from the moment a child was born, because in your world, a newborn baby was not at first a full person at all, not yet. When a child was born, it was laid on the ground, and it waited to be lifted up and looked at, and above all, accepted. The great moment, the one that truly began a Norse life, was a ritual the Norse called Vatni, which means, quite simply, the sprinkling of water. The father, or the head of the household, would take the newborn, pour or sprinkle water over it, and speak its name aloud, and with that, everything changed. The child was now a named member of the family, a person under the law, entitled to inherit, and, most importantly of all, protected. Because before that naming, in the hard old custom of this age, a family that truly could not feed another mouth, or a child born too sick or too weak to have any hope of surviving, could be left out, exposed to the elements. The Norse had a word for it, utburdr. We should be honest about it, and we should be plain, because this channel is about the past exactly as it was, not as we would wish it. It was a grim and desperate choice, made rarely in a world with no medicine, no safety net, and winters that could starve an entire household. But notice the crucial line the law drew. Once the water had been sprinkled and the name given, that door slammed shut forever. After the naming, to harm the child was no longer a family's terrible decision. It was murder, plainly and simply, punished as murder. The name and the water made a person, and a Norse family marked that moment with joy, and often with a gift, a first small treasure given to the newly named child, a ring, a blade, a token, a sign that this new person now truly belonged. So you were named, you were wanted, you survived. And now, at 7, you work. This is the part that a modern eye finds hardest to picture, because in your world there is no long, protected, playful childhood set carefully apart from the business of survival. Children were not kept away from the real work of the household. They were folded into it as early as they could be useful, which meant somewhere around the age of 5, 6, or 7. Your tasks are small at first, but they are real. You feed the fire and keep it from dying, because a dead hearth in a Norse winter is a serious thing. You carry water. You mind the younger children, the ones still too small to be trusted near the flames or the water's edge. You herd the geese and the goats, gather firewood from the tree line, and pick berries and nuts and wild greens in their season. As you grow stronger, the work grows with you. You learn to muck out the animals, to help in the fields at sowing and at harvest, to card wool and turn the quernstone that grinds the grain. There is no schoolroom in any of this. There are no letters drilled into you at a desk. Everything you will ever need to know, you learn by standing at the shoulder of an adult and doing it. Badly at first, then well, then without thinking. Your teachers are your parents, your grandparents, and the older children, and your lessons are the endless turning work of the farm and the house. And yet, and this matters, it was not a joyless childhood. It is very easy, hearing all this, to picture a bleak little life of nothing but labour and fear, and that would be just as wrong as the horned helmet, because the ground itself tells us otherwise. When archaeologists dig into the wet, preserving soil of Viking towns like Dublin and Trondheim, they pull out, again and again, toys. Real toys made for children, by hands that clearly cared. Little wooden horses, carved simply but lovingly. The single most common Viking toy we have ever found, turning up from Ireland to the Faroe Islands to the trading posts of the East. Small wooden swords and seekses, child-sized, so a boy could swagger and duel with his friends in perfect safety. Tiny wooden boats, complete with little masts, so a child could sail a whole fleet across a puddle. There are dolls and spinning tops and a clever little bone toy, a flat piece of bone threaded on a loop of string that, when you spin it and pull, hums and buzzes in the air. And remember, these are only the toys that happen to survive at all. Nearly everything a Norse child played with was made of wood, and wood rots away to nothing in most soils in 1,000 years. It is only in the rare, waterlogged, oxygen-starved mud of towns like Dublin, Trondheim, and Staria Ladoga far to the east that these small treasures were preserved, sealed, and forgotten. For every toy horse we hold in a museum today, there were surely thousands more, loved to pieces and long since crumbled into the earth. And there were games with rules, real games, the most famous of which was Hnefatafl, a board game of strategy where one side defends a king against a besieging army. We have found the boards and the little disc-shaped playing pieces carved from bone and antler, scattered across the whole Norse world. So picture it truly. A Norse childhood was work, yes, from a very young age. But it was also a wooden horse dragged through the dirt of a longhouse floor, a buzzbone humming, a small fleet of toy ships, and long winter evenings around a game board by the fire. Both of those things are true at once. Now, as you pass the age of 7 or 8, the work you are given begins, gently, to point you toward the adult you are becoming, and here the paths of boys and girls begin to separate. If you are a boy, you spend more and more time with the men and their world. You learn to handle real tools and real weapons, to care for an axe and a spear, to row and to read the water and the wind, because on a coast like this, a boat is survival itself. You learn the animals, the seasons, and, if your family trades, the sharp art of the bargain. If you are a girl, you are drawn into the equally demanding world of the women. And make no mistake, in a Norse household, that world was powerful. You learn to spin and to weave at the great upright loom, and cloth was not a small thing here. It was one of the most valuable things a household could make, the very sails that drove the ships. You learn to preserve food against the winter, to brew, to make cheese and the soured milk they called skye, and often to gather and prepare the herbs that were the only medicine anyone had. And the sagas show us that these growing children were expected to step up astonishingly early. In one of the great Icelandic sagas, the future poet and warrior Egil is barely 7 years old when he takes part in the rough mock combat games the Norse loved, the Leikir, playing at battle alongside the older boys. In another saga, 2 young brothers, Helgi and Birger, just 12 and 11 years old, take up the heaviest duty their culture knew, the avenging of their own murdered father, children by our reckoning, near enough to men by theirs. And there is one more thread in a Norse childhood that has almost no parallel in the modern world, and it tells you something deep about how these people bound themselves together. It was completely ordinary in this society for a child not to be raised entirely by its own parents at all. Instead, a child, often between the ages of about 5 and 10, might be sent away to be brought up in another household entirely. The Norse called it fostering. The child became a foster child, the new household its foster family, and this was not a sad thing, nor a mark of poverty or abandonment. It was the very opposite. It was an act of trust and of honor. To foster another family's child was to say out loud that these two families were now bound to one another, their fortunes tied, their loyalties joined. If one was insulted or attacked, the other was honor-bound to stand with them. The bond between fosterkin could be spoken of, in the sagas, with the same weight as blood itself. It was so respected a custom that even kings used it. The famous king remembered as Hakon the Good was, as a boy, sent across the sea to be fostered in the court of a foreign king in England, a living bridge of alliance between two royal houses. To be given the raising of a child was a gift, and to raise one well was a source of lasting honor. So let us gather up this whole strange, hard, tender Norse childhood and see the twist at the heart of it, the thing that is genuinely difficult for us to feel. At every stage, from that first sprinkle of water, through the chores at 5, the games by the fire, the weapons and the loom at 8, you have been moving steadily and without pause toward one destination, adulthood, and you arrive there early. Under the law, a boy might not be counted a full adult until around the age of 16, able to take on the fullest legal weight of a grown man. But long before that, by 12 or 13, you are already expected to work, to fight, to marry in time, and to carry the responsibilities of an adult in almost every way that mattered day to day. And here is the point that changes everything. There was nothing in between. There was no stage of life set aside for what we would call the teenage years, that long, protected, often difficult decade we now treat as simply a natural part of growing up. That whole idea of a teenager, of adolescence as a distinct and cushioned span of life, is a modern invention born of a much later and much safer world. In your Norse world, you were a child, and then, with very little warning, you were expected to be an adult. The soft bridge between the two had not yet been built, and that is exactly why a Norse childhood feels so short to us. Not because these people did not love their children, but because the world simply could not afford to keep them children for very long. But do not walk away thinking it was cold, because if you want the final truth of how the Norse felt about their children, you have to go back to the ground one last time and look at the smallest graves, and there is a genuine puzzle waiting there. In a world where so many children died, you might expect Viking cemeteries to be full of tiny graves. They are not. Children are strangely, hauntingly rare in the formal burial grounds we dig. Out of thousands of known Viking burials, only a small handful of clear mother and infant graves have ever been found. So where did the little ones go? Often, it seems, they were not sent away to the cemetery at all. Their small bodies turn up in quieter, closer places, tucked beside an adult, or laid to rest within the walls and floors of the home itself, kept near the living rather than out among the dead. Read it gently, and it looks less like neglect and more like a family that could not bear to let go. When archaeologists do uncover the burial of a Norse child, they do not find neglect, they find love, they find children laid to rest with care, and sometimes with the very things that had filled their short lives, a comb, a small toy, a treasured object, gifts to carry into whatever came next. In a world where children were terrifyingly easy to lose, they were not loved less. If anything, they were loved with a fierce, clear-eyed tenderness that we, cushioned as we are, can barely imagine, the love of people who knew exactly how fragile the small, warm body in front of them truly was. So think, one last time, of that 7-year-old on the cold longhouse floor at the start of this Saturday, feet on the packed earth, the baby crying, the fire coming to life. In 5 years that child will be, in every way that counts, grown. There will be no teenage years to soften the way, and that child was sprinkled with water and given a name and a gift so that they might be a person, was folded into the work of the family the moment they could carry a pail, was given a little wooden horse to drag across the floor and taught a game of kings by the winter fire, was raised perhaps in a second family that loved them like their own, and was loved at every step by parents who knew all too well how quickly the smallest of us can slip away. So here is what we would love to hear from you. Which of these surprised you the most, that a Norse child was not even a legal person until it was named with water, that they worked from the age of 5, or the strange, quiet fact that the Vikings had no teenagers at all? Tell us in the comments below, because the real people of the past are almost never who the legends say they were. They worried over their children, mourned the ones they lost, carved little horses for the ones who lived, and asked of them, gently and out of pure hard necessity, that they grow up faster than any child ever should.